Welcome to the CircuitPython Show. I'm your host, Paul Cutler. This episode I'm joined by Liz Clark, also known as BlitzCityDIY. Liz is a Massachusetts-based maker who dabbles in electronics, music tech, 3D printing, CircuitPython, and anything else that looks interesting that day. When her soldering iron is cooling, you can find her with her cats Winnie and Harriet. Liz, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Many of the projects and learn guides that you've shared are music related. What is your music background?
So I started playing piano when I was a kid. There was a program at Parks and Rec department. That's how I started. And then as a teenager, I picked up guitar, taught myself, and I was in bands. And then I was coming up in bands just as MySpace started being a thing. And that became like the thing for bands to record more, whereas before it was, you wouldn't necessarily go do that. So it's really expensive to get studio space, especially when you're a teenager. So that's when I started getting into recording audio, and then I found I actually liked that a little bit more than playing in bands. So that's why I decided to study in college, and that's how I got into MIDI and everything like that. So that's kind of been my music journey.
Okay. So you're studying music tech in college. Is that when you first started to become a maker and get into that community as well?
I've always made stuff, like I've done sewing and knitting, things like that. My family really into things like that too. But as far as like electronics and coding, like I didn't know that was really a thing until college. And while I was in college, it felt risky to be majoring in music, just because, you hear things like, oh, you'll never be able to get a job and things like that. So I wanted to try to like expand my skills, and that's when I found out about Arduino. This was like 2011, 2012. And I saw that folks were doing like DIY music tech projects like MIDI things or robot instruments. So I attempted to do a little bit with Arduino, but again, I had zero coding background. Folks will talk about like using Macs and stuff in school. Like I never did that. So it was a steep learning curve with really no guidance. So I didn't do too much with it, but it was something I always wanted to explore more of. So after I graduated and I did get a job and everything, I wanted to get back into doing more DIY things. And that's when I started my YouTube channel as kind of a way to not get sucked into just doing a grind of like going to work, coming home, kind of keep my brain sharp. And that's when I started diving into Arduino and really learning it, and eventually Python and all the other projects I've done.
How did you make the jump from Arduino, which is, mostly C-based, to CircuitPython, which is completely different?
Again, not too much coding experience, so I barely understood what I would be doing with Arduino. I really couldn't tell you why my code would be working. I would just be like trying a bunch of things. And then CircuitPython came out. I was curious about it because I knew that, Python would get used on Raspberry Pi, and I dabbled like a little bit with that, but again, didn't really understand how it was working. But Adafruit had all these libraries for CircuitPython for stuff, and the CircuitPython Essentials guide that Kattni did that kind of went through everything. I started to understand it a little bit more, and I understood what the code was doing, which was a big game changer for me, as basic as that sounds. And then that's when I started trying to do slightly more complicated projects with it, and now that's just my go-to for everything.
Yeah, you hit on a key point. Python, it's all about the readability. It makes it so much easier to read than some of the other programming languages out there.
And now that I've worked with Python so much, like other programming languages will make sense to me. Like I just finished up a project with processing, which is Java-based, and I was a little nervous at first because I hadn't done Java before, and I slightly scarred from the Arduino experiences and not being able to understand, but I picked it up a lot faster than I had. So I think that's important too. If people are just getting started coding and started CircuitPython, then it might help them to understand other programming languages down the road.
You mentioned your YouTube channel, which is BlitzCityDIY. Is there a story behind the BlitzCityDIY name?
When I was starting a channel, I wanted it to be a name that would kind of last and also be unique. I've been in a lot of bands and done the whole coming up with a band name thing. So I kind of approached it that way. It's kind of a reference to a couple different things. The Blitz comes from Blitzkrieg Bop by Ramones, and it's Blitz, which is an album by the AAS. And then City, I liked that because of the idea of like collective, like a group. I didn't know if maybe I'd work with people down the road, and also I've always been really community focused. And then the DIY, just to kind of give it some context, it all kind of roots from DIY punk aesthetic. That's kind of where the name grew out of.
Love it. So you also mentioned when you were talking about Arduino, robots who play instruments, and you built a xylophone. Tell me about the xylophone.
That was actually the thing that I originally wanted to build in college when I found out that that was a thing people were doing, but I did not have the skills at the time. I played some mallet stuff in high school and college because I showed up to the band room and I didn't play the band instruments, but because I played piano, the band director said, well, xylophone's a pianoist mix. I've always really liked the sound of that and percussion instruments too. So I had the glockenspiel from there and thought it'd be so cool to have it be able to play like automated music from MIDI, because the only thing about mallet instruments is you're limited to how many mallets you can have. And so you can play 4, but it's really hard. It's hard to do stuff really fast and everything. So the idea of making an acoustic instrument that can play stuff that a human necessarily wouldn't be able to very easily. So that was kind of my inspiration for it. And with CircuitPython, and it made it a lot easier.
So for someone looking to get into MIDI, what do they need to get started?
MIDI is this kind of standard way that started up in the 80s of having musical instruments communicate with each other digitally. So it stands for Musical Instrument Digital Interface. So for MIDI, there's really good library support now with both Arduino and CircuitPython. Back when I was starting, which what held me up a bit, we had to do weird stuff with baud rate and everything like that. But the CircuitPython library especially is really plug and play. And basically it makes it so that your microcontroller just interfaces through USB. There's other ways you can do it too, but the easiest way for someone to get started is USB. You can just have simple things like a button input or potentiometer, and you can control either software or hardware synth because it's sending these MIDI messages, and you can code it to suit your needs, basically.
So when you code the notes, it's actually sending it right back. If let's say I had an electric piano or a keyboard plugged in, it would send the notes back to the keyboard, and the keyboard, it would sound like it's playing the actual notes.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
How does it work on a computer? Do you need like a digital audio workstation to capture those?
So you can use a digital audio workstation like Ableton or Pro Tools or Reason. Then there's also little programs that can kind of read the notes back to you, almost like a serial interface. One that I really like is called MIDI Berry. That's what I usually use when I'm building a new MIDI project. It'll tell you exactly what MIDI notes you're sending. And that way, you can have the REPL in Moo tell that to you, but to actually see that the MIDI messages are truly going into another program is important. And you can have like a software system there also play back the note, be affected by the different messages, because you can also do things like pitch bend or modulation.
Tell me about the MIDI arcade project that you wrote a learn guide for.
MIDI Arcade Fighter is a collab that I did with Nairez, and he designed the case, and it kind of came from a need he had, which is why DIY MIDI controllers I think are so exciting. He does a lot of finger drumming, and he will take the time to map the different sounds as DAW to the MIDI controller. And so he was like, it'd be really cool if you could assign them like on the controller, kind of on the fly. And so that's why on that particular MIDI fighter, and there was a company that used to make things called MIDI fighters. It was these arcade button things, and it's kind of become like its own genre of MIDI controllers. And so for our version, there's a little screen with a 5-way joystick where you can adjust the MIDI notes on the fly, so everything can be mapped like live. And then someone in the community actually made a addition to the code that you could store MIDI mappings in a JSON file and kind of call them up that way, which is really cool. That's one reason why I love Learn Guides. You can kind of put like this basic version of the code, or basic, and then people can build on it, because that's totally something like that would have been awesome to do, but to then see someone in the community take it from there is really awesome too. And the reason why that's, I think, a good starter one is I think most folks, when they want to start with MIDI, they just want to get a note going somewhere. And that project does that, and it also shows you how you can have stuff lighting up, because we've got lights on the arcade buttons, and also that additional thing of the MIDI note mapping, I think is helpful for folks, because you can either take the really basic stuff and crib it to your project, or you can kind of build on that.
Hi, it's Paul. I'll get you back to the show in just a moment. Thanks for listening, and if you're enjoying the show, please tell a friend or write a review. You can also support the show financially. Your support helps cover the cost of podcast hosting, recording services, and transcriptions. For more information, visit circuitpythonshow.com/support. Now, back to the show. You just finished a MIDI Learn Guide, deep dive into MIDI for the Adafruit Learn Guide system. What were some of the key takeaways from that?
When PT brought up the idea of the guide, kind of MIDI for makers, I wanted to write it almost for myself like 5 or 6 years ago. And I just thought of like, what was I looking for with no background knowledge on how to get started? There's all sorts of information, like what it is, how it works, but then also like what boards work with CircuitPython and Arduino, and the different types of MIDI communication, because there's USB MIDI, there's also MIDI over UART, which is serial communication. That's when you see those big chunky like 5-pin connectors. That's how that's working. There's also Bluetooth MIDI. So just kind of explaining how that all works. I wanted to have 3 examples for MIDI in, which is sending MIDI messages into a destination, and also MIDI out, receiving MIDI communication. So there's an example for a quick little keyboard, having POTS control things. There's also showing how to convert MIDI UART to USB, because you can do that with CircuitPython and Arduino, and all the examples are in CircuitPython, so folks can just use that library and just kind of go with it.
I thought it was a great guide. It actually inspired me to go get our old electric piano that we've had in storage out and bring it down near my office, trying to figure out what kind of projects I can start to do with MIDI, because I need another project on my list.
That's awesome. I'm hoping it'll be a good resource for folks, and it'll save someone from having to have like 15 tabs open when they're just getting started.
What is your music setup like at home?
I've got this synth shelf that I built during the pandemic because I started getting into Eurorack and other things. And I've got Eurorack on top, pocket operators, and robot xylophones that we talked about on the bottom shelf here. Then going down, I've got a mixer and my USB audio interface for mic inputs. And then to my right is my guitar setup, so my amps and things like that. And behind me is actually used to be where the synth shelf was, and where the pandemic seeming to possibly be getting better, and as a result having folks over for dinner more often, hopefully, I thought it'd be better to get my table cleared off. So now everything is kind of in one spot, which is nice. Before it was a little bit disjointed. I've really come to love Eurorack and synth. People are doing a lot of really cool stuff with open source and synthesizers, like Thea Flowers, Winterbloom. She has some CircuitPython-based modules, so there's a really cool overlap, I think, with synthesizers, CircuitPython, music tech happening right now. So that's kind of why I got into that.
And for those who might not know, what is Eurorack?
It's these different, they call them modules. You'll see them, they're like these little kind of PCB things with circuit guts on the back, and you rack them up. And basically, you got to think of them as like little pieces of a large synthesizer. So you're taking these modules and building basically your dream synth. And so there's all these filters and oscillators and things like that. It can get upsettingly expensive, so I try to keep it as minimal as possible, and also youth market is the way to go. But it's really fun. You patch everything with these little cables, so you're almost kind of building these little musical circuits. If you think about, like, if you were going to blink an LED with a microcontroller, you have the wires to the resistor and the LED. It's similar to patching a synth voice on your rack. You have your oscillator, you have your filter, you have your VCA, PCO. It's really cool. So it's a way to kind of keep it like a creative musical experience, but also like technical too.
And they have a similar community as I think we'd find in CircuitPython, which is very open source oriented. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. The corners that I've been in, at least, have been very open. and open source, and people are really into building their own modules too. And I hear a lot, even from Thea, that like people ask like, well, I know you have this module, but do you have a kit? Like people will want the kit over a fully built module, which is
interesting.
Yeah.
Well, before we wrap up, I have a segment that I call Turn the Tables, where I've been asking all these questions. Now you have a chance to ask me a question.
My question for you is, what is your favorite CircuitPython library?
That's a good question. Right now, I've been playing with my PyPortal.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So I'm cheating because it's a whole class, right? It's not necessarily a library, but the PyPortal's got those tools built in where it can actually read a JSON file, take an image, put it through Adafruit IO, and give you the bitmap back. So that's what I've been playing with. So it's not so I'm cheating. I'm not really answering your question, but that's currently my new favorite thing to play with, is just trying to feed it. What can I feed this class and what do I get back?
Excellent.
Where can people find you online?
So I post on Twitter and Instagram as BlitzCityDIY. I also have a website that has not been updated in a very long time, BlitzCityDIY.com. And also BlitzCityDIY is the name of my YouTube channel. And I have also recently begun working full-time with Adafruit. So I'll be having a lot more guides and hopefully videos too with them as well.
That's great to hear. So speaking of Adafruit, you're about to start a new project or prototype. What microcontroller are you going to reach for first?
Recently, it's been the Feather, but specifically the RP2040, because it has the Stemma QT connector. And when I'm prototyping, even if it's just Stemma QT, I do still like to have that base of the breadboard. So I like to have that plugged into the breadboard, and then you have the ability to do the Stemma, which is really nice. So that's kind of my go-to. And the Feather, too, when you're prototyping, it usually has enough pins, possibly more than what you need. That's my go-to.
That's a great pick. It's amazing how far the RP2040 has come in just a year.
Yeah, that was a very nice, I think, kind of jumpstart to microcontrollers and kind of the electronics community. And I think it also got a lot more people using Python on microcontrollers, because when it initially was released, there was CircuitPython and MicroPython support, and the Arduino core wasn't quite ready. So I think it got people to explore a little bit. Which is really cool.
That's a great call out. Liz, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks so much for having me. Great talking to you.
Thank you to Liz for being on the show. You can find Liz's YouTube channel at BlitzCityDIY. For show notes, transcripts, and to support the show, visit CircuitPythonShow.com. Until next episode, stay positive.